Today, we explore contingency leadership theory and what it looks like when plans change, pressure rises, and leaders must adapt in real time. From communication breakdowns to the need for flexibility, this conversation gets practical about how great leaders respond when things don't go to plan. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Theory to Thriving podcast. I'm Jesse Innes, and joining me is my co-host, Dave Zetlow. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate you listening wherever you may be. Please like and subscribe. You can find our podcasts on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and theorytothriving.com. You can also find our blog on Substack and LinkedIn. We love to include you in the conversation, so leave us a comment or join us in our free-to-join Discord. Until then, let's hop into the conversation. So, today we are talking about contingency leadership theory. And I'm excited for this one because I feel like every single time we focus on a theory, I feel like this is the theory. This is the language that I've been looking for. And so I'm excited for everyone to get a chance to hear about this and for us to discuss this. So, Dave, if you could walk us through what is contingency leadership theory?
Yeah, contingency leadership theory was developed first by Fiedler and then expanded by Hershey and Blanchard. It looked at the fact that leadership was a dynamic process. Everything didn't go according to plan. The last two or three times we've been together, we've talked about leadership theories that basically talk about developing systems, developing checklists, developing processes, making sure your whole team is on board. Contingency theory really acknowledges that things go wrong. You're dealing with people. You're dealing with people dealing with information. You're dealing with an environment, depending on what you're doing, and you're really dealing with dynamic visioning and corporate purpose. Right? Even if you're for profit, you're dealing with different markets, so things go wrong. And contingency theory was really developed to try to start to understand what do you do when the leadership theory you're applying isn't working at the moment? One of the things I'd be really interested in, Jesse, you've held a variety of jobs. Have everything always gone smoothly, or as you looked at this, has contingency theory kind of triggered something in your history?
Definitely triggered something. And even in you just mentioning it now, the first thing that came to mind back in 2020 when the world shut down, essentially, I thought that that was the perfect opportunity for me to step back and create the perfect system for myself where all of my work was scheduled and all of my tasks had a time to do them. And I was so excited. It was going to be my opportunity to develop a system that was going to work perfectly. And over time, I got more and more frustrated because obviously things kept coming up that I didn't plan for. And it even got to the point. So like I said, I'm doing this in 2020 when the world shut down. It got to the point where my wife was a little bit hesitant to even check in on me because she's like, well, every time he gets thrown off, he gets frustrated. I don't want him, so the 2020 me really needed this theory. I worked as a logistics manager for a event company, and we would have our event date set, and we would work on pulling everything together between the time that it was set, typically at like a year in advance. And although you might think that having a year's worth of time would make you prepared for anything and everything, having a year's worth of time really meant that anything and everything could happen, right? And then even if you get all your ducks in a row, you get to the event time, and typically our events were outdoors. You get to the event day, and then there's a storm that day. Can't really plan for the weather, right? Or it says, the forecast says there's a storm, and then few people buy tickets if they haven't bought tickets months or even a year before. and then people don't necessarily show up, but then the rain goes away and then it's actually sunny that day, right? So there's so many things that I remember happening, so many situations where we had to pivot, where we thought we had enough of something, we had to go send somebody to make a run. um we set up our tents, we designed everything the way that we wanted it to, but then the wind was too much and started blowing tents away, and all the logistical things that we had planned, we always had to be on the ready to make a backup plan. We ordered enough ice. Well, guess what? Today is actually, it's sunny, so we have a lot of people, but it's so sunny that it's so hot that we need more ice than we thought we did. We need more ice than we needed last year because it's 2 degrees warmer and the ice is running out even faster. So life happens, and so many things. And I think another thing that I've realized too, with the idea that life happens, is the more people that you involve in the plans, the more chances of things kind of going out of whack, because everybody's got their own lives and everybody's got people in their lives, and everybody's juggling so many things. And so, just because, I am healthy enough to show up on event day, doesn't mean that my spouse, my kids are healthy enough, and so then I have to try to figure out, can I even be present even though I'm fine? Can I be present? I've got children in the mix, all these types of things. So I really, I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn about contingency theory. Uh, and I'll say today that I'm grateful for the hard way of learning it back in 2020 and all those subsequent years. But yeah, it's a challenge when you don't expect life to kind of get involved.
Yeah, if you looked at some of the theories we've talked about, they do understand that things happen, right? So
Hmm.
some of the behavioral theories of leadership we've talked about, and some of the other aspects, they have backup plans and those types of things. What contingency inquiry really addresses, and many of the others doesn't, is their basic personality types, right?
Hmm.
People respond differently when there's a problem, right?
Yes.
They are people that do the next task. There are people that look at the bigger picture. There are people that uh, basically freeze up, right? No, we've got to do it this way. It's in the procedures. There's some that are willing to throw the procedures away. So, what
Hmm.
contingency theory does at its core is really have you understand your team, understand the situation, and not only react to the situation as you talked about, but know who to go to. Who needs
Hmm.
the detail? Who needs the general picture? How do we work this out? So it's really a very dynamic leadership theory, if you will, in practice. And the other aspect of it, I don't know if you have a thought on, is that everyone says that they can handle problems, and not everyone handles it effectively for the other people in the team.
Mm.
Basically, it gets back to your point. If there's a lot of people involved, how do you communicate with everybody? Do you communicate it with everybody? Do you break out a independent group and handle the fact that you're being rained on, right? While
Hmm.
everybody else stays to the plan.
Hmm.
Those are all kinds of things that you really think about in contingency theory, too. I think is who's on your team, how does it work, what's the communication style, and do you do it in advance, or is it something you develop in part of your process that triggers essentially a whole new set of processes and procedures and thought processes, really, to be flexible enough? Because
Hmm.
obviously, one of the great aspects of checklists and efficiency comes from things like the Kaizen the Japanese used to do, where they were always why and make it more and more efficient, right? The
Hmm.
challenge with more and more efficient is if it breaks down, how do you respond to it, right?
Hmm.
So you don't want to lose that efficiency by making everything, oh, when something happens, let's just all go wild and do something innovative, right? So contingency
Hmm.
leadership is not only an opening, if you will, and an expanding, but it's also how do you maintain your effectiveness?
Exactly. And I think some of what I've experienced in the past is the initial response to just things going off the rails to begin with, right? Things going not according to plan. I feel like this theory prepares you, or can prepare you, with the expectation that things won't stay the same. Things won't go to plan. Things will shift, and sometimes those shifts are bigger than other times. And I think some of what I've experienced in the past is, leaders really kind of, like you said, some leaders kind of shut down. Some leaders get really, really angry, right? And communication is so important in that moment, because if you are trying to communicate to the folks on your team, but you're communicating in a way that is very short with them, or communicates that you're frustrated, but it feels like you're frustrated with them, and that adds a whole nother layer of frustration for them, or emotions for them that they now have to work through. And if your team's not prepared for what happens when things don't go as planned, um, I think, you kind of put yourselves in a really difficult situation. You kind of have to get yourself over not only the context of the situation, but you have an added context of emotion now layered on top of that as well. I think it's always healthy to assume that you need a backup plan. I think this theory, I think the thing that's so helpful about this theory is thinking about who you are as a leader and how you specifically adapt to those situations, and some of your tendencies when things go haywire, and how can you help yourself to be the best leader in that moment.
Well, I think contingency theory really applies pretty differently if you're a command and control kind of leader rather than a positive, encouraging,
Mm,
enabling leader. It's
mm,
really kind of two different strategies, right?
mhm,
First off, you have to recognize what kind of leader you are, because a command and control usually has a large amount of challenges to be uh, a contingency theory leader, right? Because they want to know, they want
mhm,
some certainty, they want people to obey them, right? To
mhm,
follow the rules. It can be highly effective, though, is if you can get them to, when a crisis comes up, to exert some flexibility, enable the right people on their team, feel confident about that. But it's pretty challenging because a lot of command and control, I don't know if this has been your experience, a lot of command and control leaders revert to basically telling everybody how to react rather
mm,
than finding an optimum temporary solution to the rainstorm or the parts missing or the little thing you mentioned, the pandemic.
mhm,
I mean, those are big things, right? Uh, and I think the type of leader you are, contingency theory works in general. I think a little better if you are an enabler, if you're able
mhm,
to. Basically offload some of the challenges to some of your
mhm,
people and give them confidence. I don't know, how do you
mhm.
feel about that?
Oh, definitely. And I think that that really helps when when you know your team, and you can trust that they have their area under control, and so you know who to reach out to, and when, like you said earlier, also know how many people to involve in the conversation as well, and figuring out um, just who needs to hear this information, and working with them to figure out next steps. I think if you don't know your team, you can frustrate yourself really just trying to find answers from the wrong people. And it really kind of puts you in a position of being more and more frustrated trying to communicate things to folks who sometimes have really no idea what you're talking about, but are sometimes in a position where they just want to help, and they just want to help things be better, and so they don't really even know how to communicate that they're not the best person for the job. So I think it's really important for you to get to know your team, get to know what their strengths are, how they communicate best, and kind of work from there as well.
I think one other area I wanted to kind of chat about too is the fact that we've talked in every leadership theory about the vision, right? Making sure
Mm,
everybody's bought into the vision. What are the goals of the company? One of the challenges with things like the pandemic or out of parts if you're a manufacturing company, or rain if you're a service, kind of company, is that that is out of your control. So
hmm
if, for example, your objective is to make the most money we can, that isn't the objective necessarily during the crisis, right? During the
exactly.
challenge, it could be a survival. It could be making do the best we can. It could be retaining customers in a very difficult place, right?
hmm
So part of the challenge, I think, with contingency theory is you're preparing your team and yourself as a leader for the moment when even your vision is going to be at least temporarily changed, right? And you're going to have to refocus your people on that crisis mode, if that makes any sense.
hmm So that's one of the questions that I had too, is how do we determine what the goals of the situation are, or how do we determine what the situation demands? Because like you said, maybe your initial goal was to make as much money as you can, but when the crisis arises, you have to change what your what your more primary goal is in that moment. So how do you determine what the situation demands?
Yeah, I think there's twofold there, right? There's the normally in that kind of process, you would bring your people together, bring your customers together, bring people that influence what your vision is together, and you would brainstorm, right? You would talk about it. You would talk about the new situation. The real challenge, I think, with contingency leadership theory, or one of them, is the timing. A
Mm,
lot of time, it's a problem, it's a drop in the market. It's a pandemic. It's a situation where you've lost a key customer, right? So I think that what you really need to do is build in some flexibility into an efficient operation. So I think it is also from a leadership point of view, having the leader for a while step back and really try to see what the situation actually entails, right? I remember the pandemic, which you brought up, is such an interesting example because in a lot of cases, companies tried to remain normal operations for a while, right?
mhm.
And they thought, well, maybe it'll pass, right? And some others thought, wow, it's the end of the world, right? So somewhere in there, I think it's a leadership theory. You need to kind of think about what you would do as if those kinds of things became a crisis. Now
Mhm,
that might be identifying one or two of your teammates that you might team that you might put aside for a second and have them work out while you try to continue to run the business, as an example.
mhm.
Um, you could be getting some outside help at looking at it, but I think that's one of the major challenges of contingency leadership. It's easy to write about, right? It's easy to talk about, wow, we need to have this flexibility. Very difficult to, I think, to develop a leadership process that is flexible enough. Now, I think it really pays a lot of dividends, though, particularly if it's a positive type of thing, right? It's an enabling type of thing of your people. um, it's also hard, I think, when you're being successful and you're very busy, because all of us are busy, right? Nobody hires extra people. So it's hard to say, hey, as part of your planning meetings, as part of your staff meetings, let's spend 10 minutes or 20 minutes or a half hour going through what if a disaster happens. But it might very well work. And in a contingency theory model, you'd want to do that, right? Because you'd want to have people that, hey, if we find this happens to us, we need to respond. And this is how we think is the best way to respond. This is how we think we need to develop people. This is how we think we need to make our data flexible. that type of thing. So I think you've really hit on one of the biggest challenges because everybody that I know who ever called themselves a leader say, I think on my feet, I make the, but it's not true, right?
Yeah.
It's just not true. They react and they potentially get it right or potentially damage the organization short term or long term.
hmm hmm So we have spoken in the past about appreciative inquiry. So typically, not always, but typically, when we say AI, we're referencing appreciative inquiry. We also like talking about artificial intelligence, but for right now, we're going to stick to appreciative inquiry. So my question is, how do we apply AI to this contingency theory? Is it helpful? Or is this something that we would probably need to leave our appreciative inquiry behind and move into a different space for what this situation demands?
Wow, I think you really you made a lot of progress on understanding appreciative inquiry, Jesse. That was a great discussion there. I love that. So, what we've talked about, I'm certainly a huge advocate of appreciative inquiry. It's the model that really talks about an affirmative topic. You bring up all the positives around discover. You ask yourself, what do you want more of? You dream a vision. You basically figure out a plan, and then you implement that plan, right? By its very nature, though, it's really difficult in a crisis, right?
Hmm.
Because a crisis obviously generates a negative kind of environment, right? And
Hmm.
so, while I think there's some value with appreciative inquiry once you go through the initial, right? I think the first thing the way I would look at it as a coach in appreciative inquiry that uses it to do leadership training, if you will, or leadership development, I would think you take your situation where it is right now, all the
Hmm.
problems, right? The
Hmm.
storm, the pandemic, and you figure a way to get the right group of people together to understand it well enough that we can change it to an affirmative topic, right?
Hmm.
So, for example, if your markets go away during the pandemic, right? What that
Hmm.
team would want to do is they would want to figure out, okay, we're in a crisis. We need to come up with a contingency, right, of how we lead. So we for the moment have this period where we look at different markets, we cut back, we respond to the dilemma, and appreciative inquiry is very powerful once you get through that to a
Hmm.
point wherever the new entity you are, the new leaders you are, the new team you are, the new company you are, is at a point where we can start looking at things affirmatively. Does that make
Mm.
sense? So it's not
Yes.
particularly helpful, I don't think. I'd love to talk to my friends that are big appreciative inquiry people, but I would find it something that you would be striving for as a goal to get back to.
Hmm.
I don't think it's particularly helpful during the crisis.
Okay.
Um, that's my take on it. What do you think from does that make sense, or what do you think from my thought?
That totally makes sense. I think it might be a situation, kind of like you said, where um, you move from a situation where you think, okay, let's use the pandemic for example. Initially, you're like, well, is this really something that's going to shut down the whole world? Maybe not. Let's do some contingency theory type practices in order to adapt to the current situation. But then once you realize that this is not going away anytime soon, then I would think you would lean more on an appreciative inquiry type situation where you're like, okay, this seems to be lasting a little bit longer. We need to adapt for a much more long term strategy. And then once we come out of that season, then probably we've learned some things about ourselves, learned some things about our community, learned some things about our clients and things like that. Let's go back to that. Let's not go back to the old appreciative inquiry process that we had. Let's do a new one and let's see how we can move forward into the future based on that. I think one of the ways that I see that happening a lot, this is not a crisis situation, but one of the ways that I see this kind of happening a lot is, um, I've seen some companies respond to, and here we go, respond to artificial intelligence in different ways, right? Whereas I felt like at first it was, let's we have to get on the bandwagon because everybody's doing it. I feel like now I'm noticing that different companies are trying to figure out how they can make this a mainstay in their systems. And now how are their systems totally different? At first it was like, we're going to add AI to what we're doing, and so AI will be just an extra feature along with everything that we're doing. Now it's much more, how is AI changing the way that we do things? How do we need to change our original plan, our original goals, to meet this new era where AI is such an integral part of what a lot of people are doing? So I think that's kind of the switch that a lot of folks have had to make between contingency theory. Like there's this major shakeup where we have to get on board. We don't want to get left behind, to, okay, let's do a more appreciative inquiry. How can we not just have this as an extra feature, but how can we have this as something that's changing the way that we do what we do? And some people have responded to that in negative ways. I use a system to take all my notes, and it's been heavily influenced by AI, uh, influenced by artificial intelligence. And I've seen, I get on Twitter just to kind of follow what the updates are. And I've seen people say, hey, you guys are just supposed to be a note taking company. What are you doing with all this added things? It's clear that they have sat down and said, there's an opportunity here for us to redirect where we were heading and become a company that does still offers the opportunity to take notes, but do a lot more than we were originally doing. And so I feel like that's kind of where it kind of comes down to me. A few years ago, it was just, let's add AI to what we're doing. Now it's, how can we change? Well, how do we need to change everything that we're doing and reorganize some of our goals and targets?
Yeah, I think that is really great, Jesse. It really makes me realize we've been talking about challenges, right? We've been talking about problems where AI really represents possibilities, right? It really represents the future, if you will. So, appreciative inquiry is an example. If we had a dream in appreciative inquiry to become and utilize AI to make ourselves a much broader information company, right? Or a product delivery company, then we could use contingent leadership kinds of practices in our design stage, essentially, right? Where we're
Mhm.
asking, how do we make it real?
Mhm.
Because none of us really knows where AI is totally going, right? I mean, you and I do a lot of work in it, and there's other people that do more, some do less. None of us really knows what 5 years from now looks like.
Mhm.
So you would want an organization or an individual leader to be flexible, right? To be able to say, okay, it can improve my communications with customers. It can look at my ordering material. It can do this, not knowing what the total impact is going to be, right? So, in that regard, contingency theory could be a very positive thing, right? But, and again, I get back to, if you can make it into a affirmative topic, then AI can be really strong, right?
Mhm.
Um, the other thing about artificial intelligence, I think, or anything like that in contingency theory is, how does it help or hurt that? Like, for example, I was just thinking as you were talking, some people use artificial intelligence as if it were all knowing. It was the
Yeah.
ultimate source, right? And we clearly know right now it's not that, right? Yet some leaders use that, right? And there's other leaders that discount the whole thing. We're not going to use it in our organization, right? It's flawed. It's it's not going to protect our intellectual property. A friend of mine, his company does a lot of intellectual property kinds of things for their marketing. So they're really concerned to use AI because where's the protection, right?
Hmm.
I would ask them is in the era of artificial intelligence where Jesse or Dave can know as much or more than they do about marketing in an instant, where is their value, right? And obviously they
Hmm.
have value, but you need to at least have that basis of artificial intelligence at its core. So I think
Absolutely.
contingency theory probably has a good deal of application in um, the
Artificial.
ability to look at how to design things and how to deal with
Mm.
that. I also think in this era of artificial intelligence, as you and I keep getting involved with, is how do you use it as an organization, right?
Hmm.
Um, and if there's a problem, does it cause concerns? Because artificial intelligence, at least right now, is mostly a backward looking thing, right? It
Hmm.
basically it's still a data processor. Now, people have hopes it's going to be a human that is a visionary kind of thing, and I
Hmm.
don't disagree with that. I don't know enough about it to know. Currently, though, it draws on many more sources than you and I could use as a leader, right? And gives a
Absolutely.
condensed version. So, how does that really work? How does that fit into my options, my selection of team, and those types of things? I guess I was going to ask you, since I know you've read through the contingency leadership. I don't think you had much experience with that before, have you? I'm curious, what kind of person do you think would, as a leader, would be most likely to use contingency leadership? What would be the characteristics of that leader?
That's a good question. You said the person who is most likely to use it. I think folks who have a less structured style than for me, for example. So I typically, you know, I typically run everything that I do through standard operating practices and checklists and things like that in that nature. And I stick pretty closely to those if I can. Um, I would imagine that folks who haven't really seen that to be the way that they work, they find themselves to be less structured. They, I think, would benefit a lot from this. I think everyone would benefit from this, but I think they would adapt and accept this a lot quicker. I think that there are those, like I said, like myself, who would be a lot more reticent to participate in this. I personally see myself changing though. You know, we're in 2026 now. 2020 me would still be plugging away, trying to find the perfect system, just thinking that my system wasn't adequate instead of accepting the fact that circumstances change. So, for example, I watch a lot of YouTube videos. I follow a few YouTubers who are all about productivity and building systems and things of that nature. And I noticed that as a few of those influencers, as they started to grow a family, have a family, things change, right? And so, you know, I got to the point where I noticed one of the influencers that I followed about 3 years ago announced that he was having him and his wife were having a baby. And then I noticed that the videos were not as frequent as they were before. And maybe 2 or 3 months ago, he released a video saying, you know, all of these systems and things that I created really can't handle all the aspects of life. And in my mind, I'm like, I knew it because, of course, I had had children about 3 years before he did. And then another influencer recently made a video saying the exact same thing. And so I think if you are the type of person who focuses heavily on checklists and you know, more of that was a behavioral leadership theory that we talked about originally. I think at some point we will all recognize that a more flexible style is necessary. Well, maybe I shouldn't speak in absolutes. Maybe I shouldn't say we all will, but I think it's very, very helpful for us all to adapt this. There are some folks who never really saw themselves as checklist type folks to begin with, and so they'll accept this much quicker. And that's kind of a question that I had as well: is what's the difference between being adaptable and being inconsistent? Because like I feel like one could just say, you know what, I'm not a checklist type person. I'm just going to be a contingency leader and not lean on any sort of standard or operating practices. I'm not going to lean on any sort of checklists or anything like that. Um, how can a leader create a culture where they can flex without seeming too scattered or too unreliable or things of that nature?
Yeah, I think that is a great question. And you're asking a leader that's had four different careers, right? Multiple companies. I am highly flexible, highly adaptive. I work through people. I recognize people's strengths right away. I change organizations. And I can tell you what I learned over time, and it was of some help to me, was it was really important who my number two and three people were.
Mm,
First off, they had to be able to understand where I was coming from. I had to respect them and be willing to give them responsibilities, because I always needed someone who was grounding, usually a financial person, a controller when I ran companies, manufacturing analysis when I ran lean manufacturing, et cetera. I always needed someone that followed the rules, and because I'm really highly affected my first year with an organization in a spot, still pretty effective second year, and the third year I'm just kind of average, if you will, because I've um, everybody's exhausted, right, from my changes, right. So
mm,
it's a great question, I think, but I do think you can also, and I also needed that number three person that was a marketing person, somebody that really could market the product, really understood the product. Because I ran engineering companies, I have zero interest, and I don't very little about engineering. I would get briefed before major customer meetings, and that's what I would know. And was able to deal with that because I had good engineering people, if you will. So what at least I did, and I don't know if it's a good model, but is I always looked for people that were different than me,
mm,
that added something to who I was. And I continue to believe that. So if you're a person like yourself that's very structured, has checklists, you need a partner, and I think a second and third in an organization. You're looking at church or whatever. The number two and number three people need to fill other roles, right? You probably need somebody like me that's out there, vision, what's the latest thing, crazy ideas. And we've talked about that before too. And then you need maybe another person that I don't know what your third category would be, but I think that really makes a lot of sense. And I've always kind of believed in kind of power triangles of
mm,
leadership, that one person can't be the leader. You really need to be real careful who your second and third in command is, if you will. And I think they should be different than you. Now, that's not always true. A lot of people get the same kind of people. They really relate to the same kind of people. I think that gets back to diversity of thought, diversity in a lot of different aspects too. It's really important to get somebody that looks at the world different than you. And part of it clearly is the components of what you're really good at. You ought to find other people that are really good at what you're not so good at. So at least that's my thinking. I don't know, what does that make sense to you? Or as a younger
That makes
person, I'm in this in our team here, I'm the old person, you're the young person. I hate to break that to our viewers, but that's true. How do you look at it? The same way or a little bit differently?
I look at it the same way. I think I totally agree that some of the most influential things that I've been a part of, and decisions that I've made those decisions because I've had at least one other person on my team that stretched me a bit, right? Invited me to look beyond my lists and kind of pushed me a little bit to think outside of the box. I'm very much an in the box thinker. I like to find ways to put things into categories, and because categories I feel like are very very safe for me. I love having a person on my team that can stretch me a bit, make me think differently, make me question why I think the things that I think. Um, I had a friend once say that if there are two people that agree on everything in the meeting, then one of them is redundant, right? And I like to think that way. To have that it's important to have different folks, and I think sometimes when folks see the leadership style of being more flexible, sometimes people see that as being inconsistent or unreliable. I don't necessarily see it that way. I think it's more important for you to understand how the folks that you're working with see the world instead of rushing to the judgment of this person is inconsistent or this person is unreliable. Because I think it's really important for us to see the gifts in other people. And I think it's really cool, like you mentioned. I think it's really cool that you have the two of us, one who is very very structured, one who likes to put everything in neat little categories, and then someone who is very very flexible, always stretching beyond and looking beyond. I think it's really cool that we're kind of working together and looking at this and other theories in a similar way. I think that's really really helpful. I think one of the other things too is when you're asking that question of, is this person just really good at contingency or is this person just really consistent? I think it has a lot to do with self-awareness, right? What role does your self-awareness play in contingency leadership? Because I think, and we've talked about this already, that you really need to know what your style is, what your tendencies are, especially when things are in crisis or when opportunities arise. What do you tend to do in that situation? Like, I know that when we get into like a crisis mode, I like to figure out like what is our new goal immediately, right? And I always like to have a couple of people around me to kind of bounce that idea off of, to communicate as soon as possible, so that I'm not rushing to judgment, or I'm not rushing to the easy way out, because I know personally I'm a conflict avoidant type person as well, and so I don't want to just rush to the most peaceful solution. But sometimes I need some folks to kind of encourage me to make do the next right thing. I also know that when it comes to situations where things seem to be very positive, I can sometimes um I can sometimes rush and kind of like abandon a lot of the things that I've already established and want to go try that new thing. And so it's helpful to have someone to kind of keep me grounded, like you said, and kind of keep things contextual as well. So yeah, I think along the same lines is that we it's helpful to have. I always think that you should have one other person. I like your idea of three, having a triangle of folks in the conversation, so that we can have different perspectives. And I also just kind of feel like that, again, that diversity, you can't beat it. Having diversity of thought and perspective and lenses and backgrounds, I think is always good to have that.
You mentioned I know we're getting towards the end, but you mentioned the pandemic, and I was just talking about people you're relating to. And one of the interesting things to me was when we had to go to all online classes, right? And it was super easy for me. I was done in 2 days because I just threw everything out I had done before, and I basically created something new, right? Because that's just who
Mhm.
I am. Where some of my colleagues were excellent teachers, right? Undoubtedly at par with me, or maybe probably better at teaching students and the curriculum. They had to figure out how to take every one of those notes, every one of those cases, and redo them online, right? So I think that's one of the challenges for sure, and frictions in organizations that I'm sure we're going to continue to talk about over the next few years. Because it's easy to say there's differences, right? But when you start actually seeing it with people, both of who are highly capable, but they're different people, how do you make those work? And that's really why we started um, this process, right? Because leadership theories, with a couple of exceptions that we'll eventually get to, I think they're really well grounded and they basically make a lot of sense. And you shake your head and go, yeah, that makes sense. And the challenge is in the actual implementation on the ground, right?
Yeah,
It's how does it really work out that way?
absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for joining the Theory to Thriving podcast. If you made it this far in the video, continue the conversation with us. You can join our free to join Discord, or you can just leave us a comment. We'll see you soon.